US President Donald Trump has called the bluff on threats of retaliation, slapping duties on the import of steel and aluminum. But he's offering an olive branch to some trade partners who said they'd strike back. And it seems to be working. On Wednesday, the EU's trade commissioner was getting ready for a showdown at the World Trade Organization.
From what we understand, the motivation of the US is an economic safeguard measure in disguise, not a national security measure. That means that the EU is entitled to make use of the WTO safeguard agreement to rebalance benefits that we have given to the US in the past. This would be done by carrying out measures that match the economic loss suffered by us because of the US move.
2 days later, she's toned down the ultimatum, hoping to stay in Trump's good books.
The EU is a close ally of the US, and we continue to be of the view that the EU should be excluded from these measures. I will seek more clarity on this issue in the days to come. Looking forward to meeting USTR Lighthizer in Brussels on Saturday to discuss.
Other leaders are also ditching the free trade doctrine to plead for exemptions instead.
Australia is a strong ally of the United States. It has no better ally than Australia. 100 years of mateship is recognised. Secondly, whatever complaints the United States may have about other trading relationships, it has no complaints with respect to Australia. America has a trade surplus with Australia, a large one, in fact. And so we make our case.
We will consider what steps to take within the WTO framework, but we will also continue to ask the US to exempt us from this tariff.
Just hours after Trump authorized the new tariffs, Japan and 10 other countries signed the revised version of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The deal, which aims to slash duties for 40% of the world's economy, excludes China. And when the dust settles, China could be the only major US trading partner to bear the brunt of the new trade barriers. Mobin Nasir, TRT World.
So let's get more on all of this now, and joining me from Paris is our editor-at-large, Craig Copetas. Also joining me for the discussion is Maurizio Zanardi from Lancaster University. He's a professor of international economics over there. Craig, let me start with you, if I may. Look, does Trump's move to grant exemptions to some countries, Canada, Mexico, possibly the EU, does all of this basically show that ultimately this is about isolating China?
No, it's all about isolating China. The U.S. has an $800 billion trade deficit, as are. America's had a trade deficit for 40 years, amounting to somewhere in the neighborhood of $19 trillion. Steel is the proverbial fig leaf in here, and if you tear away the fig leaf, which they say is for defense, you're still going to find defense. Because the Department of Defense actually says it only needs 3 million tons of steel a year. There's more. I mean, that's nothing. Well, America brings in close to like 90 million tons of steel. So what this is coming down to is a counterbalance to China's Belt and Road Initiative. That's what this is about. If you look at what the trade deficit, if you really dive into it, you find out that the U.S. has trade deficits with about 10 countries, and that's it. Mexico, China, South Korea, Japan, and I think South Vietnam and a few others. So you go in and you try and fix it with them, and that is what he's doing. If you want to look at this briefly as about just the economics, okay, this is about bad money, specifically countries suppressing their exchange rates. That's a big factor in trade deficits. This is a military move on Trump's part. I think it has very little to do with economics, right. And the Joint Chiefs of Staff has actually said that this is more or less a military move.
Okay, Craig, so you're sat in Paris. How serious is the EU about triggering these retaliatory tariffs, as we've been hearing this week from Cecilia Malmström, and as Mobin said in his report there has been a shift in tone from the EU over the last 24 hours?
I don't think the EU is serious at all. I don't even factor the EU into whatever analysis we're doing here. The U.S. is not going to return to a 17th century mercantilist policy, even though they sound like they're going to do that. And the EU is certainly not going to counterattack with more of the mercantilist nonsense that got France and the rest of the EU into problems, centuries ago and continues to this day.
Okay. Maurizio, let me turn to you now. Let me ask you the same question I just asked Craig. Is Trump's move, in your opinion, about isolating China?
Well, it may be in the intention, but the point is that it is important to remark that the United States is already imposing a lot of trade barriers against imports of steel and aluminium from China. So as a matter of fact, that is a 25% tariffs will not be mostly focusing China, but mostly some other ally like Canada and Mexico that may be exempted, but then especially European Union, South Korea and Australia. So although I think that we can all agree that the root problem of the overcapacity in the production of steel comes from China, actually I'm not sure that the measures announced by the Trump administration will really focus and will be felt by China.
Okay, well, let's talk about the EU's possible retaliation to all of this for a second. The EU is considering tariffs on things like orange juice from Florida, bourbon from Kentucky, Harley-Davidson motorcycles, all of these things aimed quite specifically at Republican constituencies. Do you think that such targeted measures will work? Or do you think if the EU wants to retaliate, that these measures should actually be much more broad-based?
Well, the European Union is always choosing its list of targeted products very carefully, in the same way that they did in 2001 for the safeguards introduced by President Bush. Clearly, these are measures that achieve a certain amount of economic pains, but then they are clearly targeting political aspects of the process of the United States. I do think that the European Union is serious in possibly carrying out this threat. Now, of course, in the moment in which President Trump says that he's open to have a conversation and there will be a meeting in Brussels on Saturday, then it's in the European Union's best interest to exploit and to see whether that route can lead to an exemption for European steel and aluminium.
Right. Craig, let me just bring you back into the discussion here. We heard Maurizio describing these as possible safeguards. Do you see them in that way as well? Are they safeguards or are they basically protection for certain industries?
I see Mauricio's analysis as a very sharp microeconomic analysis of the situation. Sadly, Trump is a macro man, and that's what he is looking at here. He is looking at what China is doing with the Belt and Road Initiative, pumping in $1.4 trillion into areas of the world so the Chinese can capture these areas economically with credit dependence. They're buying ports, they're building ports and airfields, et cetera, et cetera. This has been going on. It is going to continue. And I want to reemphasize here, 2 days ago in front of the U.S. Congress, the Secretary of the Navy, Richard Spencer, said what China is doing here. He called it, quote, weaponized capital. And that is what is undergirding this entire tariff move. Again, you don't need tariffs to have a trade war. That trade war is going on now, and there's no fortress so strong that cannot be taken by money.
Okay.
And that is what Trump is trying to counter right now.
Right. Fair enough, Craig. But, Maurizio, look, there is the case, however, that such trade imbalances can't go on forever. What needs to be done to make sure that free trade, doesn't impoverish some people and enrich others?
Well, but at the same time, if the United States is maintaining such a large trade deficit as it has done for several years, decades, is because the system is working, in the sense that this trade deficit means that the United States is importing much more than exporting, which means that other countries in the world are willing to take the dollar as a piece of paper in exchange instead of goods. And that reflects the importance of the dollar as a currency in the world, and the fact that the balance then is made up with with investment and movement of capital across countries. It is not that is in a way, in my belief, a rhetoric of Donald Trump that trade must be balanced, because otherwise we will be going back to a very mercantilistic view where only exporting is good while importing is bad. Having said that, I completely agree that what President Trump is trying to achieve is a macro type of policy, and it is targeting, in essence, would like to target, in essence, China. I'm just not sure that the way that it is doing it, first, is the most efficient way of doing it, and that second, is really targeting China when only 6% of the imports of steel and aluminium at the moment enter the United States from China.
OK, we are almost out of time. Maurizio, let me ask you this. Meanwhile, while all this has been going on, 11 countries, excluding the US, have signed a revised Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. How is this going to change Trump's calculus, do you think?
Well, I'm not sure it will change in the short run. It is very symbolic that the two things occurred on the same day, and that Trump withdrawing from the TPP, it was one of his first acts when he became president in January 2017. I think that his calculation at the time is that the TPP would have collapsed. Instead, the other 11 countries are forging ahead and possibly considering to enlarge to other countries. The United Kingdom, for example, in his discussion and thinking about Brexit, is considering whether to join the Trans-Pacific Agreement. So clearly this is going to shift the situation, and the Trump administration has not excluded that they may decide to re-enter in the negotiation, in a conversation later on. So here it's a lot of calculation and possibly miscalculations, but it's in a sense, we have to wait and see what will actually happen.
OK. Gentlemen, fascinating discussion. There's going to be plenty more to talk about in the days and weeks ahead. Maurizio Zanardi from Lancaster University in the UK and Craig Copetas in Paris, thank you both very much indeed.